Welcome to Clubs of London, the podcast that ventures behind the closed doors of London's private members' clubs. From the centuries-old gentlemen's clubs of St James's to the glamorous Mayfair empires built by the Burghley family, this is where we uncover the stories, scandals, traditions, and characters that shaped London's most exclusive institutions. If you sign up to the Patreon, you'll get extended episodes, 2 exclusive bonus episodes every month, and early access to new releases. In the meantime, pour yourself a drink, find yourself a comfortable chair in the bow window, and settle in, because we're heading to White's. A short stroll down St James's Street in London's Piccadilly sits perhaps the most famous or infamous private club in the world, White's. A place so bound up with British establishment life that it's almost become mythical. Prime ministers, dukes, princes, spies, dandies, gamblers, soldiers, and aristocrats have all passed through its doors. It has survived fire, scandal, political upheaval, financial crises, 2 world wars, and centuries of changing social attitudes. And yet, White's remains what it always has been: private, male, and exclusive. To some, it represents the very peak of old London club life. Elegant, eccentric, and steeped in history. To others, it symbolises everything insular and antiquated about the British establishment. But whichever side you fall on, one thing is undeniable: White's has shaped British elite culture for more than 300 years. So this is the story of White's Club. White's began not as a gentleman's club, but as a chocolate house. In 1693, an Italian immigrant, Francesco Bianco, opened a fashionable establishment in St James's selling hot chocolate. At the time, chocolate was exotic, expensive, and associated with wealth and sophistication. London's coffee houses and chocolate houses functioned as the social hubs of their age, places where gossip, finance, politics, and scandal collided. To the authorities, they could seem dangerous. Coffee houses in particular were viewed with suspicion by the Crown because they encouraged open discussion and criticism of government. But White's quickly evolved beyond politics into something else entirely. Fashionable society gravitated there. So did gamblers. Young aristocrats with fortunes to spend gathered inside its rooms, and before long, White's had acquired a reputation for excess. Writers of the period described it as a haunt for reckless young noblemen, card sharks, and opportunists. And in truth, that reputation wasn't entirely undeserved. To understand early White's, you have to picture Georgian London at its most extravagant. This was an era of immense inherited wealth, weak restraints, and endless appetite for risk. And White sat directly at the centre of that world. Cards were played constantly, money changed hands at astonishing speed, wagers were placed on almost anything imaginable. The club's famous betting book still survives today, effectively a written record of aristocratic boredom colliding with unlimited money. Members gambled on elections, births, deaths, marriages, sporting contests, the weather, and deeply questionable scientific experiments. One particularly notorious wager involved a bet on whether a man could survive underwater for 12 hours. An unfortunate volunteer was reportedly lowered beneath the Thames inside a vessel to test the theory. The outcome was not encouraging. Other members became equally infamous for their gambling habits. George Harley Drummond of Drummond's Bank allegedly lost a colossal sum to Beau Brummell in a single sitting, enough to damage his standing at the family bank itself. At White's, fortunes could disappear overnight, but the danger was part of the attraction. Risk itself became entertainment. White's early history was turbulent in more ways than one. A devastating fire destroyed one of the club's early premises in the 18th century, forcing members to relocate elsewhere on St James's. The blaze caused such excitement that both King George II and the Prince of Wales reportedly appeared to supervise and encourage the firefighting effort. Even then, White's occupied an unusually prominent place within elite society. By the mid-18th century, the establishment had evolved beyond a public chocolate house into a more private social institution. An inner social circle gradually emerged inside the wider clientele, eventually becoming known informally as the Old Club, distinct from a younger and more chaotic crowd known as the Young Club. In 1753, the club moved into larger premises at the top of St James's Street. Then, in 1781, the various factions formally merged together. Whites, in the form we recognise today, had effectively arrived. If one image defines whites historically, it's the famous bow window. Installed in 1811, the great curved window overlooking St James's Street became the symbolic heart of Regency high society. And seated inside, more often than anyone else, was Beau Brummell. Brummell was not a politician, soldier, or aristocrat of enormous rank. His power came from style. Through his wit, confidence, and obsessive attention to dress, he transformed elite British masculinity. Simplicity replaced flamboyance. Tailoring became an art form. Social elegance became its own currency. And from the White's bow window, Brummell effectively judged London society as it passed outside. To be invited to sit in the bow window was a mark of status. To be excluded from it could feel socially devastating. The window turned Whites into a theatre of observation, a place where power operated through tiny gestures, glances, invitations, and exclusions. Even now, it remains perhaps the single most famous window in clubland. Although White's was never officially a party political club in the way later clubs became, political power flowed constantly through its rooms. Nearly every British Prime Minister, from Robert Walpole through to Sir Robert Peel, had been a member. Cabinet members, aristocrats, military commanders, and royal advisors all passed through the club. But White's influence rarely looked formal. That was precisely its strength. Politics happened socially there, over cards, lunch, or drinks at the bar. Quietly, indirectly. The club later became associated in the public imagination with the idea of the British Old Boy Network, particularly during Cold War scandals surrounding establishment privilege and espionage. Though notably, none of the Cambridge spies most associated with those scandals were actually members of White's. Still, by the 20th century, White's had become shorthand for establishment Britain itself. White's has often defined itself through resistance to change, and perhaps no story captures that more perfectly than the Victorian smoking dispute. The Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, wanted to join the club. The problem was that he liked smoking indoors. At the time, smoking inside elite clubs remained controversial. White's held a formal meeting to debate whether smoking should be permitted in the drawing room. The proposal was rejected, and the future king was furious. According to club law, matters finally came to a head when a servant reprimanded him for smoking in the wrong room. The prince stormed out and later helped establish the rival Marlborough Club, where smoking rules were far more relaxed. It's a revealing episode. White's was prepared to offend the future monarch rather than compromise its traditions. Confidence and arrogance existed there almost in equal measure. Like every old London institution, White's was reshaped by war. During the Second World War, many members occupied important military and political roles. One of the most famous auxiliary air force units ever assembled, the 601 Squadron, is closely tied to the club's story. Formed in the 1920s, the squadron reportedly emerged after discussions at White's between wealthy amateur aviators and aristocratic members with a passion for flying. It quickly became known as the Millionaires Squadron, or sometimes the Millionaires Mob, because its ranks were filled with unusually affluent young men who treated aviation with the same enthusiasm they brought to fast cars, polo, and London society. Legend has it that potential recruits were informally tested at White's itself, with large quantities of alcohol involved, to see whether they could still behave like gentlemen under pressure. Their reputation bordered on theatrical. Pilots lined uniforms with coloured silk, wore bright socks in defiance of regulations, and arrived at airfields in expensive sports cars. Yet beneath the glamour was a remarkably capable fighting unit. When war came, 601 Squadron flew Hurricanes and later Spitfires, taking heavy casualties during the Battle of Britain. Its members included aristocrats, adventurers, future national figures, and some of the first Americans to fight in the war, among them Billy Fisk, who became one of the earliest American pilots killed during the conflict. Over time, casualties and replacements transformed the squadron into something far more broader than its privileged beginnings. But the link between whites and the famous Millionaires Squadron remains one of the club's most unusual contributions to British history. By the mid-20th century, whites had become deeply intertwined with the mythology of Old England. Few figures embody that world more vividly than Randolph Churchill and Evelyn Waugh. Both were members, both were famously difficult, and both reinforced whites' reputation for aristocratic eccentricity. Randolph Churchill once described whites as the centre of London. Meanwhile, Evelyn Waugh repeatedly drew upon the world of clubs like whites throughout his fiction and diaries. For Waugh, these clubs represented something simultaneously absurd and deeply civilized, places governed by manners, ritual, shared assumptions, and private loyalties. Even when mocking upper-class life, Waugh remained emotionally attached to the world it created, and that tension still hangs over whites today, because admiration and criticism have always existed side by side there. Despite its immense reputation, White's itself is surprisingly intimate. The famous bar is relatively small, the interiors feel comfortable rather than ostentatious, and much of the club's appeal lies not in luxury, but atmosphere. One long-time barman, Wheeler, was once asked by a new member whether the bar was open. "Bless my soul, sir," he reportedly replied. "It has been open for 200 years. That line captures White perfectly. The club exists almost outside ordinary time. Meals remain central to club life. White's food has long been regarded as among the best in clubland, particularly after the recruitment of chefs from top establishments like the Connaught. Royal Ascot remains a major social fixture, with White's maintaining one of the most exclusive tents at the races. And despite its reputation for conservatism, White's has never been culturally one-dimensional. Today, White's remains perhaps the most symbolically powerful private club in Britain. Its waiting list reportedly stretches for years. The gambling is less reckless than it once was. Heavy drinking is less central to club life. But traces of aristocratic mischief still linger there in ways largely absent for the rest of modern Britain. White's also remains one of the last major London clubs to maintain a strict men-only policy, not only in membership, but traditionally even in guest access. While many historic clubs gradually relaxed their rules during the late 20th century, White's retained an almost stubborn attachment to exclusivity, something that regularly returns it to newspaper headlines whenever debates around gender, privilege and establishment culture re-emerge. At one point, female protesters even managed to smuggle themselves into the club hidden inside a delivery crate, staging a demonstration against the exclusion of women from the premises. The story sounds almost comic, exactly the sort of stunt even Waugh might have invented, but it also highlighted how White's had become a symbol of an older model of elite male space. The club's relationship with modern politics has occasionally created awkward optics too. Former Prime Minister David Cameron had long-standing family ties to White's. His father, Ian Cameron, had previously served as a chairman to the club, and when Cameron entered Downing Street, he reportedly resigned his membership, conscious perhaps of how closely Whites had become associated with aristocratic privilege and establishment networking. After leaving office, however, reports later suggested that he quietly rejoined the club once again. And perhaps that tension captures White perfectly. Even people closely connected to it sometimes seem uncertain whether the club represents continuity, embarrassment, comfort, nostalgia, or tradition. Usually, it manages to be all of them simultaneously. So what is White's today? A relic? A sanctuary? An anachronism? Perhaps all three. Few institutions remain so intertwined with Britain's ruling class and social mythology. And yet White's survives partly because it has resisted becoming performative. It doesn't advertise itself, it doesn't explain itself. It simply continues. And maybe that persistence is the real reason White's fascinates people, because in a world increasingly built around visibility and access, White's remains deliberately opaque, a place where privacy itself has become a form of status. For more than 3 centuries, White's has witnessed the rise and fall of governments, empires, fashions, fortunes and reputations. Through all of it, the curtains remained drawn, the cards continued, and lunch was served. somewhere behind the bow window, someone continued quietly judging the world outside. Thank you for listening to this episode of Clubs of London. Research for this episode drew from a range of historical writing on White's Club and London club culture, including Anthony Lejeune's Gentlemen's Clubs of London. Additional background material came from articles by Edward Couzens-Lake and Quills and Quattros. Links to sources are in the description of this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please do consider supporting the show on Patreon. For little more than a price of a pint, you'll get extended episodes, 2 exclusive bonus episodes every month, and early access to new releases. And if you don't already follow Clubs of London on Instagram, please feel free to do so, where you'll see plenty of short form videos which delve into many different clubs. Until next time, thanks for listening to Clubs of London.